On Christmas Eve, my daughter stood up from the table and raised her glass like she was the guest of honor. We sold your house. You can move into a nursing home. Silence lasted one beat. Then the room burst into cheers. Glasses clinked. My son-in-law Sean laughed loud enough to echo off the windows. My sister-in-law Pam actually clapped her hands together. Even my grandson, half buried in his phone, muttered finally under his breath before pretending not to care. I sat at the head of the table, knife poised above my plate, and looked around like a man who'd been told his obituary while still breathing. My name is Thomas Hale, 74 years old, retired carpenter, and apparently I had just become a guest in my own life. I didn't argue. I didn't slam my fist on the table or demand proof. I cut a slice of ham, lifted it to my mouth, and chewed slowly while the celebration washed over me like bad music. Maple Glen, Lydia said again, smiling like a realtor with a sale in the bag. It's beautiful, Dad. They have activities, pottery classes, a fitness room. You'll love it. Pam leaned across the table to pat my hand. It's the best place in the county. You'll be safe there. Sean grinned like a man who had built something himself. No more worrying about shoveling snow, Tom. No more furnace repairs. Just peace of mind. I swallowed, sipped my water, and nodded once. When? The closing is in January, Lydia said matter-of-factly. The buyers are ready. We already made a deposit with your earnest money. You won't have to lift a finger. Earnest money. My money. I felt the words sink into me like nails hammered sideways. Tomorrow morning we'll show you the brochure, Lydia added. You'll see how much easier life will be. I raised my glass. To family, I said, because sometimes the smartest thing a man can do is speak in words no one can argue with. They all drank. Pam smiled through wine-stained teeth. Sean winked at Lydia like she had just closed the best deal of her career. My grandson filmed the toast to send to whichever friends collected proof that their grandparents were still alive. I studied my daughter's face. Candlelight softened her jaw, made her look younger, almost like the girl who used to sit on a stool in the garage and watch me sand cabinet doors. That girl had glue on her fingers and questions about the stars. The woman in front of me had contracts in her purse and a smile she had practiced in the mirror. The rest of the night blurred into the rituals of a family dinner. Pie, coffee, small talk about neighbors and layoffs, wrapping paper stuffed into garbage bags. I laughed when expected, nodded when polite, rinsed dishes while Sean boasted about closing fast. No one noticed the way I dried my hands and lingered at the window above the sink. Outside, snow drifted soft and slow against the maple tree my wife once loved to watch at dawn. By 9 o'clock, Pam left for church service. My grandson disappeared upstairs to scroll in private. Lydia and Sean kissed my cheek and told me not to worry about a thing. We'll handle the rest, Dad, Lydia said as she slipped out the door. The house fell silent again, the kind of silence that belonged to me. I walked through each room, turning off lights one by one, my fingers brushing against familiar walls. Every mark and dent told a story. The corner of the banister where Lydia had carved her initials. The scrape on the kitchen floor where my wife once dropped a cast-iron pan. These weren't assets on a spreadsheet. They were proof of a life built piece by piece. At midnight, I sat in my study with only the mantel clock ticking behind me. I took a small envelope from the drawer and laid it flat on the desk. My lawyer had prepared it weeks ago. On the outside, in her handwriting, it said, "Open only if they make their move." I put it back carefully and closed the drawer. Tomorrow, they thought, would be the day I looked at a brochure for Maple Glen. Tomorrow, I thought, would be the day they learned how well I had been listening. I went to bed with the taste of pecan pie still in my mouth and the sound of snow against the windows. The first draft of Betrayal came 2 months before Christmas, and it arrived in the form of a flyer. Lydia slid it into my morning mail as if it belonged there, tucked between the electric bill and the grocery coupons. "Just options, Dad," she said cheerfully. On the glossy cover was a smiling older couple sitting on a porch that wasn't theirs. Maple Glen Senior Living. I used it as a coaster for my coffee. The second draft was subtler. I kept a spare house key in a clay jar by the back door. Had for years. One morning it wasn't there. I found it later under the porch plant pot, the one place I hadn't used since 2008. People who don't live in a house don't realize how loudly it talks when something's wrong. I told myself it was nothing. Keys get moved, papers shift, kids snoop. But then Sean called me from the driveway, his voice light, almost too light. "Hey Tom, quick one. What's your mother's maiden name again?" He chuckled like it was a joke, the kind of laugh that buys you half a second to type something into your phone. I told him because I still trusted him enough to think he was just making conversation. But when the call ended, I sat there staring at the receiver. I could almost feel the weight of his thumbs pressing information into a form. The next crack came with a phone call from Kendra at Sunrise Title. We'd known each other for 30 years. She still remembered the day she helped close my second mortgage in '92, when we had to rebuild the roof after that summer storm. "Mr. Hale," she said carefully, "I just wanted to confirm a preliminary title request. We received paperwork for a pending sale on your property, 318 Willow Lane. You're selling?" The room tilted. "Preliminary title?" "Yes," she said. "We like to call the property owner directly in these cases." I asked her to email me the documents. Minutes later, my inbox held a crisp PDF with my parcel number, the legal description of my land, and, most insulting of all, a limited power of attorney with Lydia's name listed as my representative. The signature looked close to mine. Too close. I didn't confront her. Confrontation gives the other side time to regroup. Instead, I drove straight to the county recorder's office and signed up for a property fraud alert. Anytime someone tried to record anything under my parcel number, I'd get an instant notification. Then I dialed Elaine Porter, my wife's old friend, the only lawyer I ever liked. Elaine listened without interrupting, her pen scratching steadily. When I finished, she exhaled through her nose and said, "Elder financial exploitation is the one business that never goes into recession. You're lucky," Kendra called. We sat together for 3 hours. Elaine mapped out the next moves as if we were planning a military campaign. Revoke every power of attorney I had ever signed, file a ladybird deed transferring the house into a trust one controlled, and publish a notice of dispute that would scare any title company away from touching my property. "By the time we're finished," she said, sliding a stack of papers across the desk, "they could stand in front of your house with a buyer, and not one bank or underwriter in this state would touch the deal." I signed, notarized, and left with 2 manila envelopes. One was labeled evidence, the other bait. That night, the house felt different. The furnace hummed steady, the mantel clock ticked as usual, but underneath was a quiet tension, like the way wood creaks before it splits. I set up a pinhole camera above the hall table, angled perfectly toward the place I knew Lydia loved to leave her helpful documents. The tiny red light blinked once, then went dark, silent as breath. The following evening, Lydia stopped by unannounced. She held a folder, smiling too brightly. "Dad, this is just something to simplify things. Household expenses, shared access. You won't have to manage everything yourself anymore." She placed it on the hall table right in the camera's view. Fonts rounded, colors cheerful, words soft. Authorization, convenience, simplified. I didn't touch it. "Looks useful," I said. "Let's talk about it after Christmas." She beamed. "Of course, Dad." That night, after she left, I opened the folder. Plain as day, it was a transfer of control. A neat way to drain my accounts, redirect bills, change addresses. It was wrapped in words that made theft sound like a gift. I slid it back under the camera, closed my study door, and sat in the dark. Every creak of the house sounded like a warning. Snow fell against the windows in soft bursts, piling in the corners of the yard. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, when they thought I was just an old man staring at brochures, they'd see exactly what kind of man they were really dealing with. Christmas Eve morning, I drove to Elaine's office with a tin of ginger cookies under my arm. My wife's old recipe, a peace offering for what I was about to ask her to do. Her paralegal, Marty, had a stack of documents waiting. By 8:30 a.m., 3 of them were already recorded at the county office. Revocation of all powers of attorney ever linked to my name. A ladybird deed placing my home into the Hale Living Trust, with me as sole trustee. A notice of dispute filed against the property. A bright red flag to any lender or escrow officer with half a brain. They can brag all they want about selling your house, Elaine said, sliding me a copy of the filings. But no title company will touch it. They'd be risking their license. I nodded. The paper felt heavier than it looked. Still, she added, we'll prepare for the possibility they'll shove papers in front of you tonight. Here. She handed me a sealed envelope. If they push open this, 1-page affidavit. Sworn statement that any signature they produce is a forgery. With the trust already recorded, this is the nail in the coffin. I slipped it inside my coat. Marty handed me the second manila folder. This one's bait, she said. Inside was a neatly typed care agreement, written in friendly language about managing household bills together. But page 3 held a clause. Any attempt to coerce, manipulate, or transfer property without the explicit consent of Thomas Hale will void this agreement and authorize immediate eviction. Leave it where they can find it, Elaine said. If they sign it, you own their confession. If they refuse, you still win. By noon, I stopped by Sunrise Title to thank Kendra in person. She shook her head as if she'd seen this story too many times. They faxed in something from a UPS store, she told me. Looked like a sloppy power of attorney. I called them back and told them the file was flagged. The buyer walked away before lunch. That was when I knew Lydia and Sean weren't improvising. They'd planned this down to the holiday timing. Fewer offices open, fewer eyes watching. They thought I'd be caught off guard. Softened by carols and pie, I drove home past the park where I used to push Lydia on the swings. The snow there was undisturbed, the swings hanging still. The house smelled like cinnamon when I walked in. Lydia had already let herself in with my spare key and was arranging serving dishes on the counter. On the fridge, she'd taped a printed schedule for the night. Dinner at 5, gifts at 6, announcement at 6:30. Announcement. She'd planned my eviction like an item on a to-do list. Sean swaggered in behind her, already cracking a beer. Big night, Tom, he said. Time to think about the future. I smiled and pointed to the garland on the mantel. Careful with that nailer. Thumbs don't grow back. He laughed, missing the meaning. They always miss the meaning. At 4, Pam arrived with her casserole. Ben trudged in behind her, thumbs glued to his phone. The house filled with voices. The furnace hummed. The mantel clock ticked steady. All the familiar sounds of family, but warped. Off-key. I excused myself before dinner and went to the study. I opened the drawer, pulled out a pen, and wrote a single line on a sticky note. Then I placed it inside the bait folder and slid it under the stack of mail on the hall table. The pinhole camera above blinked once, capturing everything. By 5, we were eating. By 6, we were unwrapping gifts. At 6:30 on the dot, Lydia tapped her glass with a fork and smiled wide. Dad, she announced, voice ringing. We sold your house. The room erupted. Cheers, claps, laughter. Sean raised his glass. Pam said finally with relief. Ben filmed me again, waiting for the reaction that would be his entertainment later. I smiled politely. I nodded once. When? I asked. Closing in January, Lydia said, beaming. Maple Glen is ready for you. You'll love it. I raised my glass. To family. They all drank. None of them noticed the little folder under the mail, or the way the camera above them never blinked. You can move into a nursing home, Lydia repeated, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who thought the decision was already history. Pam let out a relieved sigh. It's what's best for everyone. Sean smirked, lifting his glass higher. No more drafts, no more broken pipes, no more worrying. Just security. Ben filmed my face again, searching for the crack, the outburst, the reaction he could post later with a clever caption. I gave him nothing. Maple Glen has a wait list, Lydia went on. But we pulled strings. You'll have your own room, meals included. You'll meet people your age, Dad. Friends. I chewed my pie slowly and watched the way Sean squeezed her knee under the table, like a coach congratulating his star player. He thought they had pulled it off. He thought tonight was their victory lap. Tomorrow, I said evenly, show me the brochure. Of course, Lydia said, smiling wider. The rest of the night went on in practice cheer. Coffee poured, wrapping paper bagged. Small talk about neighbors and sports scores. On the surface it was normal, the holiday tableau every postcard tries to capture. Underneath, the air had shifted. Everyone except me thought the matter settled. At 9 o'clock, they all filtered out. Pam left first with her casserole dish. Ben slouched after her, headphones already in. Sean and Lydia lingered just long enough to load the dishwasher loudly, as if they were performing a service. We'll handle everything, Lydia said, kissing my cheek. You won't have to worry about a thing. When the door closed and the house was mine again, I walked slowly through each room. I let my hand rest on the banister, tracing the notch Lydia had carved there when she was 12. I paused at the dining table, scarred with knife marks from decades of meals. Every corner whispered memory. None of it belonged to them. In my study, I powered on the tablet linked to the pinhole camera. The feed blinked alive. At 6:25 p.m., just before her grand announcement, Lydia had slid the bait folder halfway out from the stack of mail. At 6:26, Sean had opened it, skimmed the first page, smirked, and tucked it back like a boy sneaking cookies. I watched the recording twice. Their faces betrayed more than words. Excitement, anticipation, that thin layer of greed they thought was invisible. At 11:30, the house quiet, I replayed the last few hours again. Sean aligning the key jar perfectly after picking it up. Lydia running her fingers along the folder like it was already hers. Little habits of thieves who believe they're family. On the screen, the house looked the same but colder. The garland on the mantel. The magnet on the fridge. The lighthouse she bought me in Maine. All props in a play I hadn't agreed to. I shut the tablet. Sat in the silence. Breathed with the house. They believed they had won. They had announced it, toasted it, filmed it. Tomorrow, when the newspaper landed on the porch, they would realize victory had a different address. I turned off the lamp and went to bed. The mantel clock ticked steadily in the dark. Outside, the snow thickened, muffling the world. Inside, the house stayed wide awake, listening with me. I woke at 5:48, same as always. Years of work trained the body better than any alarm clock. The coffee maker hissed to life. The smell filled the kitchen. Outside, the street was buried under fresh snow, quiet as a church. At 6:12, the newspaper landed on the porch with its familiar thud. I opened the door, let in the cold, and bent to pick it up. The headline shouted about politics, but I didn't bother with the front page. I flipped straight to the back to the public notices. Page B7. Small font, but heavy words. Revocation of power of attorney Thomas J. Hale. Transfer of property to the Hale Living Trust. Notice of lease pendens. Disputed conveyance, 318 Willow Lane. 3 short paragraphs. That was all it took to gut their plan. At 7:03, Lydia let herself in with a key that was no longer hers. "Morning, Dad," she sang, too brightly, carrying the smell of perfume and determination. Sean trailed behind her, already on his phone, thumbs moving fast. "Coffee?" I asked, sliding the paper across the counter. "Or maybe start with the news." Sean barely glanced before turning away. But Lydia, she read it once, then again, her face draining color with each line. The smile stayed on her lips half a beat too long before collapsing entirely. "What is this?" she whispered. "Public record," I said. "People still read the paper. You should try it." Sean snatched the paper. "This says you transferred the house to a trust. Yesterday." "It does." "And revoked all powers of attorney." His jaw tightened. That's exactly what it says," I interrupted. "Kendra at Sunrise was kind enough to confirm it for me." Lydia set the paper down as though it might burn her fingers. Dad, why would you do this? Why would you sell my house without asking me? I countered. I sipped my coffee, the steam rising between us. She tried to recover, her voice turning sweet. We were trying to help. Maple Glen would be good for you. You'd be comfortable. Comfortable, I said. Or convenient? Sean pushed forward, trying to fill the silence. Look, Tom, let's not make this adversarial. We're family. We're all on the same team here. I tilted my head. Which team is that? The one that forges signatures? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The furnace clicked on, filling the pause with warm air. Lydia reached for her purse, pulled out a folder, and laid it on the counter. This is what we wanted you to sign. Just a household agreement. Nothing more. I opened it slowly. Page 3 contained the language Elaine had buried there. Any attempt to coerce, manipulate, or transfer property without the consent of Thomas Hale will void this agreement and authorize immediate eviction. I looked at Lydia. If you're just here to help, you won't mind signing it yourselves. Her lips parted. Her eyes flickered to Sean. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the doorbell rang. At 7:30, Gus stepped in, stomping snow from his boots, coffee thermos in hand. Merry Christmas, he said, nodding to the open paper on the counter. Saw the notices already. Clean work. Sean bristled. Who the hell are you? Neighbor, Gus said easily. And someone who doesn't like watching folks get robbed. Lydia's hand trembled just slightly on the folder. She looked down, then up at me. For the first time all night, she seemed to realize she wasn't the one holding the cards. Lydia's instinct was to fix. She reached for her phone like it was a lifeline. I'll call Kendra, she said quickly. There's been some mistake. Go ahead, I said, sipping my coffee. Tell her I'm right here. She dialed, pasted on a bright voice, and began. Hi, Kendra, this is Lydia Hale. About the notice in the paper. Yes, my father's here with me. But we had. She stopped. Her smile faltered, eyes darting as the voice on the other end did its work. No, I didn't realize he filed that. No, I wasn't aware of the trust. Sean leaned in, trying to listen. Lydia's tone dropped lower. I understand, she whispered finally, then ended the call. Her phone dropped onto the counter like it weighed a brick. Well, Sean demanded. They terminated escrow, she said, her voice small. Buyer's gone. Underwriters flagged the parcel. Sean's jaw clenched. So we find another buyer. Another title company. No. Lydia shook her head, defeated. We won't. He glared at me. You went around us. I met his stare, calm. It's my house. His face reddened. Not anymore. He caught himself, but the words had already betrayed him. Pam chose that moment to walk in, a Tupperware of deviled eggs in her hands and a too bright smile on her face. What's going on? She asked, reading the tension in the room like a weather report. Nothing, Sean snapped. Everything, Lydia muttered. I slid the bait folder across the counter. If you're truly here to help, then sign this. It says you'll never try to transfer or sell my property without me. Simple. Pam bristled. You can't talk to your daughter like this on Christmas. Watch me, I said. Gus shifted his weight near the doorframe, body cam glinting. His silence was louder than any threat. Sean leaned over the folder, reading quickly. His lips curled. This is ridiculous. It's clear, I replied. Lydia stared down at the clause. Her cheeks flushed red, then pale again. She turned to me, her voice trembling. You think I'm a criminal. I think you tried to sell my house, I said. That's not an opinion. That's a fact in black and white. I tapped the newspaper. For a long moment, nothing moved but the clock. The tick of each second seemed to hammer the truth into place. Finally, Lydia reached into her bag, pulled out a pen, and signed. The pen was mine. My wife's old pen. The one she used to sign the last mortgage payment years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lydia slid the folder across to Sean. He stared at it like it might bite him, then scrawled his name in an angry line. Pam gasped softly. "What is that?" "Protection," Gus said evenly. "The kind you only refuse if you've got something to hide." Lydia pushed the folder back to me, her eyes wet but not yet tears. "Are you happy now?" I closed it slowly. "No," I said, "but I am finished." By 9 o'clock that morning, the kitchen was a battlefield dressed up as Christmas. Sean leaned against the counter, arms crossed tight, his jaw pulsing like a man trying not to explode. Lydia sat stiffly, her hands flat on the table, staring at the newspaper as if the words might change if she looked long enough. Pam perched at the edge of a chair, whispering to herself that families weren't supposed to fight like this, though she never once denied what they'd done. I stood at the head of the table, calm as I'd ever been, and placed a sealed envelope on the counter. "Open it," I said. Sean snatched it up, tore it without asking. A single page slid free, my sworn affidavit notarized the day before. He scanned it once, twice, then his face twisted. "What is this supposed to mean?" he demanded. "It means any document with my forged signature is invalid," I replied. "It means every title company in the county has already been warned. It means this house cannot be sold without me standing there in person, showing ID. Basic things honest people don't mind doing." Pam leaned forward to read it, lips moving over the words. Her eyes widened. You went to a lawyer?" "I went to a friend," I corrected. "One who understands that being old doesn't mean being stupid." Sean slammed the paper down on the counter. "This won't hold up. We'll contest the trust. You can't just move assets around like you tried to?" Gus cut in, his voice low but sharp. He leaned back against the wall, hands loose at his sides, the quiet authority of a man who didn't need to raise his voice. "Careful, son. Contesting fraud only digs your own hole deeper." Sean spun on him. "And who the hell are you, anyway? What business is this of yours?" Gus pulled his wallet, flipped it open just long enough to show the old badge he still carried. "Retired deputy," he said, "and a neighbor, which makes it my business when people try to scam the man who taught half this town's kids how to build a birdhouse." Sean's mouth snapped shut. He looked away first. I picked up the affidavit, folded it neatly, and slid it into the drawer with the signed care agreement. "2 pieces of paper," I said softly. "That's all it takes. One proves you tried to steal. The other guarantees you can't." Lydia's shoulders slumped. For the first time since this all began, she looked less like a schemer and more like the girl who once begged me to steady her bike so she wouldn't fall. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Dad, what do you want from me?" I looked at her carefully, choosing each word. "I want my key back." She hesitated, then unhooked it from her ring. She set it down gently on the counter. The sound it made, metal on granite, was louder than anything else in the room. Sean followed reluctantly, tossing his key beside hers like it offended him. Pam, who somehow had one too, slid hers across, refusing to meet my eyes. 3 keys. 3 betrayals. "You'll leave them here," I said. "And you'll leave with them." Pam gasped. "You're kicking them out? On Christmas?" "I'm asking them to leave my house," I said. "The day is just a coincidence." Sean bristled, fists curling, but Gus straightened from the wall. "Don't even think about it," he said flatly, and the fight drained from Sean's posture. Lydia stood slowly, her face pale but her eyes shining with something raw, fear, anger, maybe even shame. She clutched her purse like a shield. "I did this because I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what?" I asked. "Of losing you," she said, and for a heartbeat, I saw the child she used to be, the one who'd cry when I left for work, who used to run to the door when she heard my boots on the porch. I nodded once. "You almost did," I said. She didn't argue. She just turned and walked out. Sean followed, muttering curses under his breath. Pam trailed after, looking over her shoulder as if I might change my mind. The door shut behind them. For the first time in months, the house exhaled. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. By 11 that morning, their footprints had already half filled with snow on the walk outside. I stood at the window with my coffee, watching the storm cover their tracks, neat white swallowing the mess they'd left behind. The house was quiet again. Not empty quiet. There's a difference. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but the tone was familiar. You'll regret this. Sean never did know how to hide his handwriting, even in pixels. I deleted it without reply. At 11:30, another text came, this one from Pam. You're being too harsh. We were only trying to help. Lydia's heart was in the right place. Don't ruin Christmas over pride. Pride. That was the word she chose. I set the phone face down and returned to the crossword. 5 letters, clue, false front. I filled in facade and underlined it twice. By noon, Gus stopped in, brushing snow from his jacket. They're still parked down the block, he said, arguing. Sean's red in the face. Lydia's crying. You want me to move them along? No, I said. Let them sit in it. Snow will do the work. He grinned. Fair enough. I'll swing by later. When he left, the house felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, I ate lunch at my own table without glancing over my shoulder. A simple sandwich, a handful of chips, coffee still hot. Food tastes different when you aren't sharing it with liars. At 1, the doorbell rang. Lydia stood there alone, boots dusted with snow, eyes red. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and set her purse down on the table like it was proof she wasn't here to fight. Dad, she said softly. Can we talk? I gestured to the chair. She sat, shoulders curled in on themselves. For the first time, she didn't look like a woman closing a deal. She looked small. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she began. Sean pushed. He said it was the smart move, that you'd be happier in a place where people looked after you. Her voice cracked. I knew it was wrong, but I told myself it was for the best. I listened without interrupting. Sometimes silence says more than words. I can fix this, she said suddenly, leaning forward. If you just cancel the trust, if you sign the house back, we can try again. Start over. That was the moment she showed me she hadn't changed at all. Even broken, she still reached for the same lever. Control. I leaned back. You don't understand. There's nothing to fix. The trust stands. The affidavit stands. The evidence stands. It's over. Her eyes brimmed. Dad, you forged my name. You sold my home without me. You celebrated it. The little girl I raised is gone. The woman sitting in front of me is a stranger. And strangers don't live in my house. She covered her face with her hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the mantel clock ticking. Steady, merciless. Finally, she stood, gathered her purse, and nodded once. No words this time. Just the look of someone who finally understood a door had shut for good. She walked out without a sound, closing the door carefully behind her. I waited for the sound of the car engine, but none came. Only the hush of snow, steady against the windows. The house exhaled again. Quieter, cleaner. The next morning, the snow was packed hard on the driveway. I salted the steps myself, shovel scraping steady against the concrete. The cold bit at my fingers, but it felt good. Work always did. At 9 o'clock, a car eased into the curb. Lydia and Sean climbed out together. Pam wasn't with them this time. They walked up the drive like people rehearsing their lines. Sean carried a folder under his arm, stiff as a soldier with orders. Lydia's face was set. No tears this time. Just determination, brittle and thin. I met them at the door. Keys? I asked. Sean bristled. We gave them back. Good. Then you're guests now. Guests knock. He hesitated, then rapped his knuckles once on the frame. I opened the door wider, motioning them in. They sat at the table. Sean slapped the folder down. This isn't over, he said. We talked to a friend. We can contest the trust in probate. We'll drag this out if we have to. I poured coffee into 3 mugs, slid one to each of them, then sat opposite. You can try, I said. But it won't change anything. The documents are clean. The recordings are clear. Every forged paper you filed is already logged. Contesting it only gives my lawyer more ammunition. Sean leaned forward, veins tight at his temples. You think the courts will side with some paranoid old man? I smiled faintly. I don't need them to side with me. I only need them to read. And they will. Lydia flinched at that. She'd always hated paper trails. Listen, she said quickly, softer now. We made mistakes, but we can move past this. Dad, please. We just wanted what was best. What was best for who? I asked. Because nothing about what you did had me in mind. Sean slammed his palm against the table. You can't keep living here alone. You'll slip, you'll fall, I'll manage. I cut him off. My voice stayed level, steady as the tick of the mantel clock. And if I don't, it'll be my fall, not yours to arrange. Silence filled the room. Finally, I set my mug down and pushed the folder back toward him without opening it. You had your chance. You chose greed. That was your goodbye. From here on, you don't live here, you don't plan here, and you don't touch one board of this house again. Lydia swallowed hard. Her voice was small. So that's it? We're cut out? I nodded once. You cut yourselves out. Sean's jaw worked like he wanted to spit something bitter, but he held it back. He stood abruptly, yanking the folder off the table. Lydia followed slowly, glancing around the house one last time like it might still forgive her. At the door, she turned. Dad, she whispered, will I still get to visit? I studied her the same way I used to study wood grain before cutting, deciding whether it was solid or if it would splinter. That depends, I said, on whether you come as my daughter or as a thief. I don't let thieves inside. Her eyes welled, but she didn't argue. She stepped out into the snow. Sean pulled the car away fast, tires spitting slush. I shut the door and locked it. The click was soft but final. The house was mine again. That night, the house finally sounded right again. No whispers behind closed doors. No footsteps where they didn't belong. Just the furnace's low hum and the mantel clock ticking the way it had for 50 years. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee. The newspaper lay open beside me, the public notices still visible. Lydia's name wasn't there. Sean's plans weren't there. Only mine. Through the window, the snow had stopped. The maple tree in the yard stood tall under its white coat, steady, unshaken. My wife used to love it most in winter, said it looked strongest when it carried weight. I took a slow sip, let the quiet fill me. They thought they could erase me from this house, replace my life with their plans. But this home was built nail by nail, board by board, with my hands in hers. It was never theirs to sell. Tomorrow the locks would change. Tomorrow the lawyer would file the last pieces. But tonight, nothing more was needed. The trap had closed. The house was safe. I set the mug down, leaned back in my chair, and smiled to myself. This is still my home, I whispered. And with that, I let the silence hold me, steady and certain, as the clock ticked on.